Good afternoon, everyone, or morning if you're joining us from California. We are so excited to have our second day of our Common Ground programming weekend. This Common Ground initiative was started back in 3 years ago, actually, with Building Bridges to Common Ground. And it was so impactful, bringing people together to think about our common past, our commonness, to listen to one another, to use a perspective other than their own. It's been tremendous. And I have to tell you, when I heard who our speaker was today, I was so excited. Besides being one of our most beloved trustees for many years, Merideth has had an incredible impact, a lasting impact on our site's interpretation. She has been just one of our treasures, and a treasure to our community beyond just her scholarly impact. We are honored to have her here with us today. But I'm going to let our wonderful Director of Educational Programming and Partnerships, Jeannie Pirtle, who has been the project director behind our Common Ground initiatives, go ahead and introduce one of my favorite people in the world, so talented. We're honored to have you, Merideth Taylor.
Thank you, Nancy. So I am also honored. I consider Merideth one of my close advisors, and she is a very good listener. So I appreciate you, Merideth. And just for those that don't know Merideth quite as well as we do, Merideth Taylor is a professor emeritus at St. Mary's College of Maryland in theater, dance, film, and the dramatic arts. Taylor uses her artistic talents to enrich others and promote racial healing through expression of body and mind with movement and theater. Her latest book, Listening In, Echoes and Artifacts from Maryland's Mother Country, uses photographs of old and abandoned structures to connect the landscape, people, and place. In 2009, she produced the film With All Deliberate Speed, One High School Story, about the desegregation of Great Mills High School. She also produced our introductory film, Slaughterly's introductory film, produced and wrote. And she was the project lead for a Land, Lives, and Labor exhibit in the Corn Crib, and many of you have seen that. Our reinterpretation with an IMLS grant. So I have to say, without Merideth's work and guidance and hard work, I must say, we wouldn't be where we are today. And she's also a former board member here at Slaughterly. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Merideth.
Thank you. I'm so pleased that you asked me to do this. And both of you are very dear to me, and I thank you for that very kind introduction. And I apologize for the fact that I had to hold on to a script, but rather than just relax and talk to you all. But this is my first voyage as a Zoom presenter. Since I was lucky enough to retire before the pandemic, I have not had to teach remotely, and I'm very thankful, especially teaching theater and dance. It would be sad. But anyway, so Transcending Narrative, the Art of Healing. I have to take issue with the title first, just a little bit, Jeannie. I'm all about narrative. So the question is which narrative, of course, and I'm sure that's what you meant. But we're always going to be telling stories. The question is, what stories? And of course, we're very interested at Solderly, and I am interested in telling truthful stories. So sometimes people call that flipping the script if you are moving away from a false narrative to a true narrative. So, and then the art of healing. Also, I believe the arts can be used to heal in all sorts of ways. I definitely agree with that. I actually, maybe I'm unusual in this, but I tend to think more about the wound and the wounds. And I think sometimes, especially here in America, we tend to rush past the examination of the wound and try to jump to the healing because, of course, we want to feel better. But that is part of healing. So I had to be picky about that. But I definitely am a believer in the power of the arts to do both, tell the truth and in healing, both in terms of personal ways and in terms of societal ways. So the arts, there's so many, they're so rich, and they are suffering so right now in terms of the pandemic, and especially the theater. And I want to talk a lot about theater. But I want to start with a poem by my favorite poet, my dear departed friend and colleague, Lucille Clifton. And I'm sure that many of you probably know Lucille, know her work. I thought this was a very appropriate poem. The river between us. In the river that your father fished, my father was baptized. It was their hunger that defined them. One, a man who knew he could feed himself if it all came down. The other, a man who knew he needed help. This is about more than color. It is about how we learn to see ourselves. It is about geography and memory. It is about being poor people in America. It is about my father and yours, and you and me, and the river that is between us. I was really lucky enough to work with Lucille. I translated a children's play that The Lucky Stone, sorry, not translated, but put it into action and translated it into a play, if you can call that. It was a story. And it was really a wonderful experience. Okay, so she also came into my class. Sometimes I came into hers, and we did some projects together, mixing dance especially and poetry, theater and poetry. So the title and the invitation to speak has put me into a reflective mood, and in fact, the whole pandemic has done that. So I hope you'll be okay with my decision to share a little my personal story with you. I did not think of the idea of that ringing. Okay, sorry. So I was desperate for something visual to share, and so I'm afraid I raided my personal family photo collection or something, and that went along with the idea of telling some of my own story. And so I generally I want to talk a little bit about race, and I put that in air quotes, quotation marks, because generally speaking, the more accurate term is racism, and I try not to use race if I'm really talking about racism. I'll share one of my favorite quotes and probably come back to it. Ta-Nehisi Coates, race is the child, not the father of racism. And I think we still have a lot of confusion about that. We think of race as something real, when it is actually something real and something not real at all. And so I want to talk more about that. But my personal story, and I want to share a couple of relevant incidents from my life. So anyway, the first photo, oh my goodness. So the first photo, why is it ringing? Oh, I apologize. So the first photo that I would like to show you is my mom and me. Thank you, Kat. And we were in Arkansas. So how this came about, he's a northern family and suddenly found ourselves in Arkansas, is that my Uncle Harvey, my dad's older brother, became seriously ill with, I think, emphysema. And he was not able to work. And so he asked my brother, his brother, to come down with the family and take over his business. He had a business with vendor. He was had vending machines. There were candy and snacks, that sort of thing. And they were placed in all these little stores all around the small town, McGee, Arkansas. So a lot of small country stores, and he would service all the vending machines. And he owned that business. And he asked my father to come down and take over, which my father did. And my mother was very much a Yankee. She grew up in outside of Chicago, Illinois. And my father grew up in Arkansas, but was I would say, a reformed Southerner. He was actually very anti-Southern in his attitudes. And I have to say that I feel like I got a great start in life because my parents were very progressive, very unusually lefties, and they were definitely anti-racist. So that set the scene. We went to Arkansas. I was that tiny girl, and we got into trouble. So maybe what John Lewis would call good trouble, but it was definitely disruptive. So the first thing was that my parents got into trouble because they were paying, they hired an African-American woman for childcare and maybe to help around the house as well, Savannah. And it turned out that they were paying her too much. And that apparently was ruining the local economy. So that was problem number one. My mother was teaching in the elementary school, and she discovered that they were packing up all the worn out books and sending them over to the black schools. The schools were, of course, segregated. And she made a fuss. Well, she had no power, and that was ignored, but it was unpleasant for them. And then, my dear parents decided to start the first humanist church of McGee, Arkansas. So they put an ad in the local paper, and they basically said they were starting this first humanist church, and they would be meeting on Sunday at our house, and that everyone was welcome, regardless of race, creed, or color, something like that. Definitely color, definitely race, definitely creed. And so the next day, as I understand it, I was pretty young, but two men showed up at the door. My mother was home and knocked on the door. They were carrying shotguns, according to my brother. And they informed my parents that they would be patrolling the streets come Sunday, and if any were foolish enough to show their head, there would be violence. And then apparently they pointed at my brother, who was clinging to my mother's skirts, and said, and you better keep him inside as well. Well, needless to say, no local people were foolish enough to try to show up to something like that. And my dear parents, I mean, they were wildly optimistic and very unrealistic. So all my uncle's business, all his vendors, they all dropped him immediately. So he was losing his business, and he was getting well by then, apparently. So we were basically run out of town. And I think my parents were glad to go. Maybe they did foresee that. I don't know. And apparently my uncle was able to put his business back together. You know, he told people that it was his crazy younger brother and what could he do, you know, and they were getting out of town. So my uncle was not ruined. And so we escaped north. But it made a big impact on me, and that tells you a lot about my parents, and therefore about me. I guess to make a very long story short, I wanted to show you one more picture from Arkansas, and that's my grandmother with her cake. And there she is. That's my dad's mother, and Gerta Miller. And she was so quiet and so well behaved and at the mercy of my uncle and aunt. But anyway, she was a lovely person. Thank you, Kat. So we ended up in Colorado, in Englewood, Colorado, just outside of Denver, and spent my growing up years in the Denver area. So I want to show you a picture of my family in Colorado. So I don't know what you can gain from this other than my grandmother, my father, my mother, my uncle and aunt, and two little apparent Indians. And I don't know what you notice about this. They're pretty, average looking people, I think, and they are all white. And it's nice. I had a family. They were great people. So I also wanted to show you a little close up there on those two little Native American types. So I guess I'm just showing you this to show that I was not always tremendously sensitive to cultural appropriation. And I'm sure that we were respectful, but of course we played cowboys and Indians and all those things. And that's our little neighborhood in Englewood. All right, so just moving on quickly, I want to say that there's nothing particularly relevant. I think over the next several years of my growing up, I was totally absorbed by learning dance and theater and learning to perform. My first public performance was Chattanooga Choo Choo as a tap routine with my friend Judy Fatter when I was about 7, maybe 8. And I started studying ballet seriously when I was 11. I think that I basically in my whole growing up time had very little diversity in terms of my friends. And Colorado, Denver, it was never segregated, but of course, geographically, by where people lived, it was. Then so let's look at my little, probably junior high, my little ballerina self. And I studied classical ballet until I went to college. Actually, I had problems with my feet, so I switched to modern dance. And I learned to love modern dance and focus more on choreography. So, and then as I grew up, I also became an actor, and I have one little sort of headshot there. So I was that. I had blonde hair, the whole routine. And I really was focused totally on performance until during the anti-war movement and after I read Silent Spring, Rachel Carson, I don't know if anyone knows that, I felt that the whole, especially musical theater, which I did, was way too frivolous. And I joined the Back to the Land movement. And my then husband, we went to British Columbia and, joined the hippie movement. And there's a picture of me, I think, with a lamb we took care of a sheep ranch. There I am, long hair, and there's my orphan lamb, who I was very proud of saving. So, and I actually loved that. We built a cabin and, you know, lived, but it didn't end well. And, you know, it was back to work and back to the States. And I had to get a job and make a living. So I went back to school. And after I went back to school, my first job was at Southern Illinois University. And this brings me finally to the second incident that I wanted to share with you. At Southern Illinois University, I met and worked with John O'Neill. And there's a picture of John O'Neill. He is a founder of the Free Southern Theater and a wonderful man, a writer, actor, director. The Free Southern Theater was the theater wing of the civil rights movement in the South. And they traveled all around the South, in small towns, country, and performed. So they were a traveling theater. They never charged any money, and they shared a lot of politics, political ideas, and particularly the idea of voter registration. So it was a really important movement, and John O'Neill was a co-founder. Then he went on to found a theater company called Junebug, and they were in New Orleans until the hurricane. And he was brought in as a guest director at SIU, Southern Illinois University, to direct James Baldwin's play Blues for Mr. Charlie. And I was choreographer, and that was a wonderful learning experience for me. But I had one really, really strong memory. We met in, I think ironically, it was a White Spot, anyway, for coffee. And I think he probably wanted to raise my consciousness. I'm not sure. But he did. And what I remember is casting, that we started talking about casting. And the prevailing idea at that time in the end of the 70s, and it was considered progressive. So the idea of progressive liberals in theater was the idea of colorblind casting. And I assumed that was, that was sort of the ideal, that you did not take into consideration the race of your actors. And it was very progressive to put a black actor into Shakespeare or something like that. And we were all supposed to, accept that and think, well, isn't that wonderful? But so I was shocked when he very sort of vociferously said, there is no such thing as colorblind casting. And he was totally against that idea. And so that was one of the times that where an idea just, you can grasp it and it changes your thinking. Because he said, color always matters, race always matters. And that an audience is not colorblind. There is no such thing as a colorblind audience. And so the perception of color, the perception of race always impacts in some way what the audience is taking away from the play, which of course now, it makes perfect sense to me. But at the time, the idea that you didn't cast someone because they were white or black or whatever, that seemed like racism. So, so my ideas about casting were forever changed. And casting in theater, I think, is just such an interesting idea to talk about. And I remember that when we were Dr. Bell's presentation on Hamilton, the musical, which I thought was quite wonderful, the issue of casting came up. And So I'm really curious about what people's ideas are about what the casting in Hamilton says. You know, what is that? How does it impact an audience? Why did they make the choices that they made to do that? So, and so that's going to lead into discussing the purple flower if we still have time to talk about it. But there is attached a PDF of the article that my friend and colleague Allison Berg and I wrote that will be there for you to read about the purple flower, a play that we staged. But casting has come up in really interesting ways in a lot of work that I've done in in the college situation. But at the time, and still, I think what's not, it's considered acceptable to cast Black actors in white, in what are meant to be, or what typically are or were written to be white roles, then that's much more acceptable and has been than the reverse, right? So if you think of yourself, you're going to cast an August Wilson play. August Wilson is one of the most famous Black writers that writes about, it's about Black culture. It's about African-American culture in Pittsburgh, in fact. So it's very specific. And if you were going to do an August Wilson play, would you be auditioning white actors to play the roles? Well, generally not. I do remember reading that Japanese company tried to ask him if they could possibly do one of his plays with Japanese actors. I mean, they didn't have, they didn't. That's what they had, and I believe that they actually did gain permission, but it's rarely done. And so, if you were doing a Tyler Perry movie, would you expect to see white actors playing the parts? Well, no. So, but it's an interesting thought, and it really makes us think, why? So, why would you not do that? And I would suggest that it's because we have terrible history. So we have a history of minstrelsy and blackface. So we're all very aware, I'm sure, of the legacy of blackface and how much trouble people have gotten into, not good trouble, bad trouble. People have gotten into, especially politicians, when it's revealed that they, wore blackface. Well, we have a toxic history in terms of this. And where it gets questionable and confusing is, well, how does this fit with the idea that we are in some way actually all part of the human race, and that there is no real race. There is a social construct that's very real about race, but it's not a biological reality. So, and we are supposed to be able to empathize with each other and be able to put ourselves in each other's shoes. So, and then on top of that, acting is all about playing other people, right? So where do you draw the line? And is there any way we could transcend our history? What happens when you start questioning what you can play, right? What is the role? If it's a role that you're taking on and taking off, what's the significance? So it's a very interesting time in theater, thinking about that and playing with that. But anyway, that brings us to the purple flower. So how are we doing on time? We still have time? Actually, don't know. Well, Nancy will.
Absolutely,
you have plenty of time.
Okay. All right. So I hopefully some people will have some questions or some answers for me in terms of talking about Hamilton or about casting and race. I also had some other experiences with that. And I've done a lot of plays, developed plays with students, collaboratively developed plays, original plays at St. Mary's College. And we did a play that told, was kind of a historical look at the college, and particularly applying a kind of a lens of race or racism and legacy of slavery. And we had, luckily we had diversity in the cast, but we wanted to do a little bit, an opening that reflected the colonial, the first sort of discovery, so to speak, and with a Native American figure or American Indian figure. And lo and behold, we had really no Native American to play that part. And at this point in history, the cast was really up in arms at the idea that it was sort of like you can't have a character if you don't have the actor to play it. Well, and there's just, the logic breaks down, but because we are not, as actors, playing who we are, unfortunately or fortunately. But anyway, I also had a white actor once who played an Asian role, and it was in a play by David Henry Hwang, and there was no way I had 3 Asian actors that could play these particular parts. And I really wanted to do the play. So I actually called him up and said, well, what if one of the characters, and it was a specific character, was not Asian American? And he said, oh, yeah, he wanted it done. He said, do the play. And he did come and see it, which was fantastic. And he approved. So if it's a question, when you're doing professional theater, if you're doing it on a national level, you can afford, there's money involved, which makes all the difference. But also you have resources to do that. But if it's a question of should we do the play or not do the play, and we can't do it in the most perfect way, then what happens when you have people believe that, oh, the actor's playing someone that they're not, but we're supposed to accept that? And is it offensive or is it not? And I have to, one more time that this happened in a really questionable way, I would say, is I wrote a play, The Cocoonery, that was based on local history. And one of the main characters was a young man who is a very light-skinned African-American, because he was supposed to be able, he was joining the war effort in World War I, and he was supposed to be able to play someone who could pass as white, because the issue was if he joined a white regiment, it would be a very different situation for him than joining as a black officer or black soldier. So we had a guest director, a very well-known, nationally known guest director, and he cast a white student in that role. And, some African Americans did not take it well for obvious reasons, but for him, he wanted the best actor, and the role was written for a light-skinned African American. So he felt that the audience could use their imagination. Now, I don't know if I'm sure I would probably not have done that, but I did not say you cannot do that. And my adventures with casting. Okay, so the purple flower, Merideth Bonner, we have a picture of Merideth Bonner. There she is, beautiful woman. So this play was written during the Harlem Renaissance in 1927, I think. And the Harlem Renaissance was just a fantastic time in Harlem, New York, Harlem, a lot of African-American writers, artists, musicians, dancers, a lot of them had arrived there from the South and other places, and it was a very, very rich cultural mix and time. And Merideth Bonner was one of those who was a playwright. And I'm sure that most people know Langston Hughes, for example, Zora Neale Hurston, all these very famous people whose work came out of the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, and then they kept working, kept writing. And Jeannie, if you're there, and you let me know if I'm running out of time, because for some reason
you still have plenty of time if you have more to say. If you want, just let me know when you want me to jump back.
Okay, is that 36 minutes left? Is that what I have?
Yeah. Okay. You have about a half hour.
Oh, okay.
A little under.
Sorry. All right. So, enacting difference, Merideth Bonner's Purple Flower and the Ambiguities of Race is the article that my friend and colleague Allison Burt and I wrote that that was published in this very attractive African American Review, and was an exploration of an in-class project that we did staging the Purple Flower and then reconsidering it afterwards. And you have a PDF of this that you can read, but I will read a little bit of it. And so imagine that you are a director looking at a script, considering whether you want to stage it, whether you want to do it. And this is what the playwright tells you about the setting of this play. The stage is divided horizontally into two sections, upper and lower, by a thin board. The main action takes place on the upper stage. The light is never quite clear on the lower stage, but it is bright enough for you to perceive that sometimes the action that takes place on the upper stage is duplicated on the lower. Sometimes the actors on the upper stage get too vociferous, too violent, and they crack through the boards and they lie twisted and curled in mounds. There are any number of mounds there, all twisted and broken. You look at them and you are not quite sure whether you see something or nothing, but you see by a curve that there might lie a human body. There is thrust out a white hand, a yellow one, a brown, a black. The skin of civilization must be very thin. A thought can drop you through it. Well, what do you think? You ready to mount that play? So, as you might guess, that play really didn't get produced. But it did by us, all right? So I'm going to read a little bit more of the paper. This excerpt from the stage directions for Merideth Bonner's experimental drama, The Purple Flower, provides some clues as to why the play, which won the 1927 Crisis Prize for Literary Art and Expression, was never produced. Bonner's description of characters, as ambiguous and intriguing as her set description, indicates two sets of players, sundry white devils, and whose horns glow red all the time, and us's, who may be white as the white devils or brown as the earth, but should look as if they were something or nothing. So, the challenge of realizing such directions on stage is certainly one reason that the play was not produced, but in her lifetime. And it may have, we did it in 1998, believe it or not. I mean, I thought it was somewhat cutting edge to be talking about enacting difference and racial ambiguities in 1998, but not that cutting. But now, I mean, that was that long ago, and this somehow is still relevant. But anyway, perhaps the most important reason that the play wasn't produced, though, was its revolutionary message, particularly the final warning the us's issued to the white devils. You have taken blood. You must give blood. There can be no other way. So, seeming to suggest a race war. So, 1927, interesting. So, our experience directing a staged reading of The Purple Flower in the context of an undergraduate literature course, this was not theater, this was a literature course, Allison's course, suggests that Bonner's play is best understood by considering the problems it poses for would-be performers. For the interpretive questions raised by the play, these questions become, in rehearsal and performance, an opportunity to reflect critically on how racial difference is constructed and maintained. What is most striking and most challenging about Bonner's play from a performance perspective is not its prediction of racial revolution, but its paradoxical suggestion that race is both an illusion and a primary determinant of social identities in the United States. And that, I think, was the critical issue for me. So race is both an illusion and a primary determinant of social identities in the United States. So race is real, all too real, but race is based on a total falsehood, something that is unreal. So hopefully, maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that a bit. And I think that's where most people are now, but I know a lot of people still, believe it's just a total biological reality that there's 4 races. There's white, black, yellow, red. I mean, it's, nonsense. But anyway, very painfully real. So we were really attracted by its potential to foster discussion and examination of attitudes about race and racial identities. And it really, that's why I think it's such a great play and worth looking at. And this is the kind of thing that theater, and especially in terms of education, which this was an educational project, can do, but it also, good theater fosters debate, and it asks people to bring an open mind, and it, the audience is the final piece. A play script is not a final piece. It's not final. It's not complete until there's an audience there perceiving it and reacting to it. And that's the wonderful thing about live theater in particular. Okay, so, yeah, and it's the fact that this was an unrealistic play made it wide open in terms of interpretation in a way that most of the plays, this was very uncharacteristic of the Harlem Renaissance plays. They were usually very realistic, kind of very much about realism, sort of kitchen sink drama. But this is wildly experimental, I would say. So The Purple Flower offers a deliberately non-realistic setting, undeveloped character types, and most significant for our staged reading, a multiplicity of racial markers from well-browned or bronzy brown to browned peach, indicating gradations of skin tone between black and white. these divergences from the practice of her contemporaries are all in service of her more overtly political theater, right? And she adds an argument in reading of the play. The white devils live on the side of the hill, somewhere. On top of the hill grows the purple flower of life at its fullest. This flower is as tall as a pine and stands alone on top of the hill. The usses live in the valley that lies between nowhere and somewhere, and spend their time trying to devise means of getting up the hill. The white devils live all over the sides of the hill and try every trick known and unknown to keep the usses from getting to the hill. For if the usses get up the hill, the flower of life at its fullest will shed some of its perfume, and then there will be somewhere the white devils. So, what really became interesting was working with the students to figure out how we were going to do this. But one more thing is the play identifies 4 possible routes to the purple flower. How you get there. Work, books, God, and money. That seem to apply more generally to the quest for the American dream. Likewise, while the climax of the play calls for a young us named Finest Blood to extract blood from a white devil, apparently a call to violence, the initial stage directions make it difficult to read the predicted violence as a clash solely between blacks and whites. The human mounds that Bonner places on the lower stage as examples of those who have failed to gain a place on the hill are made up, after all, of white, yellow, brown, and black figures. So there's, again, this total ambiguity when it comes to color and race. So Bonner's, her reference to the thin skin of civilization, that we think she intended to point out the arbitrariness of race itself. For example, the irrational association of skin color with civilization or the lack thereof. So, I mean, this was in 1927, obviously, very forward-thinking, brilliant person that she was. The play is sufficiently ambiguous to allow a race and or class-based interpretation. In fact, it's pretty ambiguous enough to allow for a lot of different interpretations. So that was great because that's what we wanted to do with our students, figure out what did they think? What kind of choices would they make? All right, so in our initial discussions of the play, our students varied widely in their interpretations. Yet students' understanding of the play did not polarize along race lines. Rather, approximately equal proportions of black and white students initially felt that the play was solely about race or only partly about race. Students who espoused the latter view, only partly about race, right, felt that American history of racial discrimination left a legacy of economic disparities, but that race no longer determined an individual's power and privilege. So, no, this was 1998, so the students are a bit coming in with a little different ideas. And they cited Michael Jackson as an example of a, quote, unquote, raceless success story. Other students argued that Jackson's ever-lightening skin, which they interpreted as evidence of internalized racism, demonstrated how important race still was. They cited Rodney King's experience as further evidence of the persistence of deeply rooted racial stereotypes. And speaking of Rodney King, who was beaten by police and in 1998, and then connecting it up with today and how we may or may not have made some big changes, some progress, maybe. So they concluded at that time, the students, that the persistence of racism that may lead to a race war, that it was conceivable, even inevitable, eventually. So I wanted to share a little bit more about the students' response. So our questions for them were, how should we cast the play? What are the crucial elements of the setting, and how should we indicate them for the audience? And to what extent should we physicalize the characters? This was a stage reading and with no resources whatsoever, no budget, an in-class project, right? So big questions. And I'm going to share a little bit about what they came up with. So, so the question about casting: should only African American students play white devils? Should only white students play white devils? We asked students to consider the larger implications of casting in terms of current debates among theater practitioners and theorists, which I've already talked about, prefacing our class discussions of this issue with a brief presentation on current casting practices as well as philosophical debates. We introduced the concepts of colorblind casting and race-specific casting in order to engage the question of if and how race mattered in the theater. Though our own options were governed to a large extent by the demographics of our group, there were not enough African Americans to play all the us's, for example. We felt it was important for students to consider the implications of casting decisions. We wanted especially to contextualize the issue in terms of the historically exploitive tradition of Black representation in the theater and in terms of the current debate between exponents of the race doesn't and shouldn't matter and race and gender always matter schools of thought. So my first conversation with John O'Neill was in probably 1980, maybe 79 or 80. And this was in 1998. So same questions still hanging there. So we had they decided to divide up into readers, movers, and and we created, so they created three bodies. Anyway, some of them read, some of them almost got into dance-like movements, and others spoke their lines as well. So I don't want to share this all. You can read the article if you're interested. I hope you find it interesting. The students, so they ended up choosing their own roles. We kind of gave up. I mean, they could not, they really couldn't come up with a rationale for any particular connection to their own racial identities or how they defined themselves and the parts. So they basically ended up individually making those choices, which was fine and interesting. So they were guided more by their inclinations to read or move or dance than any other reason. So, but students who took on a part that allowed them to enact a social position other than their own seemed to gain more insights into the play's complexity than those who did not. I think how they came about, how they decided to symbolize the purple flower is an interesting discussion, but I won't read it now, but you can read that if you think, how are you going to characterize, without a budget especially, but the life at its fullest, the purple flower, what would you do? What would you create? All right. And then, so I'll kind of skip over that and let you think about it. So we did some movement exercises, and that would bring in more of my dance background. But these were exploring different power dynamics, right? So if you think about it in terms of racial identities, is really a power hierarchy, right? So white supremacy. And so the idea of color and race is tied up with the idea of power and a hierarchy of power. It is very much complicated by our history, of course. But so they had movement exercises of exclusion, inclusion, forming a unit, a group, or being pushed out, striving. So the strivers came up with a whole movement routine of reaching, falling. They created human bridges to try to get to the flower, which was, of course, up above, and falling back down. So that it did become dance-like. And I think that the part of the point I wanted to make is that actual physical involvement, first of all, when an actor completely embodies a character, they are actually affected by that. It is a form of learning. Physically, when you embody something, it changes you. It's not like your brain and your body are two different things in two different places. Movement is a form of learning, and it is all-encompassing. So they actually were affected very much by not just what they were saying, but by their movement. And they were also affected by their level. So students wrote about those who were up above on the looking down. It really affected. They felt like, oh, I had such a feeling of power. And the students who were down and striving upwards, it really felt like they experienced something different. And those who formed a bond, the us's, who formed a unit, who held on to each other and protected each other, that feeling of being a part of a group was, because it was physicalized, changed how they felt. They also had to come up with costumes, and that was another really interesting choice. But a fear again that I better hold off on that. But you can think about how they had this ability, again, without a budget, sorry, to think how are they going to characterize these groups. In general, the students' essays reflecting on their experience confirmed Margaret Wilson, who's a theorist, suggestion that the theater offers a unique opportunity to step into the space of other individuals and other experiences with safety. And particularly in their case, of course, in this situation in college. So maybe I should pause there, although I'd like to tell you more about the students' responses and see how we're doing and if people have questions or comments. What do you think? Jeannie, is this a good place to pause?
Okay, yeah, I'm here. And yes, we have some questions if you're ready for some.
Okay.
So what do you think of the way Hamilton was cast? And do you think that there were any missed opportunities in the way it was written or produced?
Well, I'd love to know what the person, you're asking me a question.
It's Nancy. It's from Nancy.
I think that it didn't really. I think it was wonderful. I mean, I think that there were good choices, and that it definitely accomplishes seeing African Americans as playing these founding fathers, playing these high-ranking people, and still being able to sing and rap in incredible ways, so that they are drawing on all the strength of African American culture, but portraying, at least as what we see, these high-ranking characters is a good thing, in that it helps to break down barriers of seeing always those people as white. I don't think, on the other hand, that it was particularly challenging any preconceptions in a really big way at this point in time. I think that it didn't really say that much about racism or race. Basically, I don't think it really said much, except that it was great to be able to see all these wonderful African American actors, and certainly in terms of being impressive, it couldn't have been more impressive and more phenomenal. But I think particularly in terms of the music and the mixing of hip hop and music theater and jazz, and I mean, just amazingly written. I think where a lot of critics have said, and I would agree, is it kind of missed the boat as far as slavery. I mean, it had an opportunity to make some kind of comment, powerful comment, but it really didn't. And that was just kind of a little flitting thing going through about slavery. But it was displaying African American performers as virtuosos. And also, I mean, maybe if you just sort of didn't think too much about it, it was kind of saying that, well, how do we really know? I mean, they could have been, they could have been black. We just didn't know it. Maybe they were passing, that sort of ambiguity about this. But I didn't really think the casting was challenged us in any big way.
Okay. This question is for me. Really, it's a thought, and then I want your thoughts on it. They did a remake of Steel Magnolias, the movie, with black actors. In my opinion, I think it makes people visible and reminds us that people have common feelings of friendship and loss. But can you speak to these kinds of, because it's not the only one that's been redone, but can you speak to that?
I did not see it, but I mean, I totally agree with you that, that empathy, people have been talking about empathy a lot lately, and I think that that theater is a fantastic resource in terms of, or film, of developing empathy. Actor training develops empathy. And when you see, as an actor, to understand a character, you have to look at their given circumstances. In other words, what's their situation? What are they after? What are their goals? What are their obstacles? And in the case of doing a play with, two different casts like that, you're basically seeing just what you said. I mean, these people, maybe their obstacles are a little bit different. Maybe their situation's a little bit different. But especially in terms of their relationships, their goals especially, you may see how similar they are. And I think that develops a sense of connection and empathy, and realize that, we're all really alike. So I think that's really good. And I don't think that empathy necessarily can change the internalized racism. The structural racism. It can't. It needs actual activism to make changes, but it certainly can change the heart and the understanding and make people feel more connected. And the more that people feel connected to each other, the better off we are, and the more possible to work together to make those changes. So I think that's definitely all to the good. People need to realize that we're connected. You'd think that climate change, that the problems we are facing in the world would make people realize, oh, you know what? We're all in the same boat. Why this is not happening more than it is. I just pull my hair every day. What? We have one planet, and we're all on it together. And really, not that many people are going to be able to go to another planet anytime soon. So, and we all suffer from loss, and it's the human condition. So, yeah, I think anything that says, "Oh, right, we're in the same race, the human race," and can foster those feelings of connection is absolutely necessary.
Okay, I have a question from Lynn. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the acceptance in this country of white actors playing the parts of Native Americans, Hispanic, and African American people?
Ideally, I would love to see representatives of different socially identified race groups, say, to play characters that represent them. That would be the best. That would be ideal. However, if that's not possible, I don't think that means that we leave them out, because then we're not looking at that character. We're not looking at that character. That character is lost. So again, I think the fact that we have this terrible history where we've had really bad representation and appropriation gets in the way. But as long as someone is able to play a character with belief and respect, I think that should be possible. If you look at economics, on the other hand, I think if there are, say, if there's a black director to do a black written play, and that person is available, that person is, when it's a matter of making money, that makes a difference. I think it's better to choose someone that that can represent that culture authentically and is in need of a job, so to speak. I mean, that would be best. But I don't think, if you cannot find that person, that's where I think we need to turn that corner. I think we need to address to say, these actors are they're actors. They're not. Their whole job is to play other people. And if the research is done, and the belief is there, and the honesty is there, and there's no one else to play that role, then I mean, I personally think that should happen. That should be an option.
Okay, and we had one more question. What performance are you the most proud of, or that you feel had the most impact?
Oh, I don't think I could pick a favorite. That'd be like, who's your favorite child? I really loved the work that I did in developing original plays with students, and I did a play in my time, which was based on the cultural journalism that Andrea Hammer did with students at St. Mary's College, and it was the first play that I wrote based on oral histories. Well, it was the first play I wrote, and it was based on oral histories, and it's also where I fell in love with oral history. And the cast there was about 25 people, and the youngest was 4 or 5 years old. The oldest was 85. My friend Mary Somerville, and it was sort of between a sociological experiment and and a production. But since then, I've done other plays, and the last we did a Crossroads on Common Ground, which was the story of St. Mary's College, and the crossroads on common ground was both figurative and literal, in the sense that people have been walking the same paths since before the colonists arrived. And so we did a history, and the students wrote their own personal stories, and we plugged them into this sort of history. And we did a second version of Crossroads for the 175th anniversary of the college, and it was really, I think, quite wonderful. And I've also done dance concerts, and then, you know, I did professional work before that. So they all had their appeal, and you know, I liked them all. I think I like doing comedy too. And I actually got to, I was teaching at Illinois University. We had a summer theater that was really good, and I directed and choreographed and got to do, West Side Story and Oklahoma and all the big musicals, and that was a treat too. And then, you know, once you've done that, fine, I don't need to do that again. So that's so I don't have.
Thank you. That was really good. I love it when you elaborate. So Walter Gardner asked, he said, repeat the statement about taking the time to look at the wound and healing the wound, and then he has a question. What is the right balance today in dealing with the education and economic divide and violence we see in our inner cities today?
That's way beyond my expertise. But let us say with soldering, for an example. And since that is what I've been familiar with working with over the last over 10 years, and when we were working on our exhibits, and just coming up with how to represent solderly in terms of with the public, and the movement to discuss the big conversations, wanting to share. I've done quite a bit of different sort of, John O'Neill developed something he called story circles, and actually was able to bring him to St. Mary's College. And he did a performance of his one-man show, Junebug Jabbo Jones, and he did story circles. And people sharing their own stories, basically, as a way of reaching, as communicating, and just what you were talking about the sense of connection, the sense of empathy and connection, and that we can all identify with each other. We look for what in our story connects us versus what divides us. Hopefully I can get back to what the question was, but anyway. Yes, we want to talk about it, but and it is really important to discuss and to hear each other, listening. I mean, my book is about listening, and I think there's nothing more important than listening. My dear friends, Carrie and Michael Klein, folklorists, they have a saying that listening is an act of love, and I absolutely believe that. And that's why story circles, sharing of your feelings, and in terms of racial conflict is all very important. But with our exhibit, I think unless you really, I'm really interested in studying and learning more about slavery. And I think that people just gloss over these things, and they think, oh yeah, slavery, that was bad. And there were good slave owners and bad slave owners, and I mean, the complexity of what it was, it is just staggering. It was not one thing, and I don't think we look deeply at, what if we look deeply at it, we have to start seeing what connects today and what's happening in inner cities, and what's happening with police violence and disparities in health and economy and everything that to me grow out of slavery. And if we really examine the wound being slavery, and then Jim Crow, I mean, the wound is not healed, right? And it continues. And unless you actually analyze and examine that, instead of just pushing it aside and saying, well, now let's all be nice to each other and let's connect, you've left something really important out. So I'm just really focused on learning and truth telling and seeing what we can find that will lead us and make us understand how we got to where we are now. You know, what was it, and what really happened to those people, and what has made it continue? What has kept people from getting ahead? What has mired African Americans, a lot of African Americans, in poverty? And for example, really look at that period of failed Reconstruction. That's so important. And I mean, there was this tremendous possibility at the end of the Civil War. I mean, it was at least a chance to flip the script, to change the narrative. It was a moment when things might have changed and that would have taken us on a different path. But instead, that promise was greatly snuffed out with the racist Jim Crow practices. But if we go back and look and think, how did we get here? And I mean, many people have said it in many ways. What can we learn from really looking at what's happened that can help us figure out more of solutions? And it may just be bringing more people along, getting more people on board with the kinds of changes that we need to make. I mean, people already know, I think, a lot of the changes that need to happen, but there's so many obstacles and so much ignorance dragging us backwards. So, I mean, we could change what's taught in the schools, and that would, that might make a huge difference. But anyway, I feel a soapbox coming on. Anyway, yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I do feel that the economics have to change, and we have to find ways. We have to find programs to be able to bring people more truly into the same boat, and that's not happened. And we need to be geared towards rather than competition and tearing each other down, and the polarization is. I feel, unfortunately, I feel pretty hopeless a lot of the time. So, but because the polarization is so intense, and I just think, how? So anything that can help to make us less polarized, to pull us together, and even if it's just a realization of the trouble we're in, that would be something. If we realize that the Arctic is melting, the seas are rising, for example, and we think for some reason or that people are dying from the pandemic, and it shouldn't have to be you. It shouldn't have to be your grandma, or it shouldn't be someone you know. I mean, there are people out there, 175 or whatever it is now, 1,000 people, Americans dying, and to say, well, some people are going to die is just, I don't know how we got to that place, but I don't know. I don't have the solution. Oh, I can't hear you, Jeannie. Uh-oh.
No, I'm here. It's just I'm trying to keep the feedback, so I turn it off when I'm not talking. So one more question. What have you been made more aware of by your association with Solderly?
made more aware of. Well, actually, I would say my association with Unified Committee for Afro-American Contributions, I wanted to mention. In the chat, I added a link to the UCAC website. I've been working with the Unified Committee for Afro-American Contributions since 1996, and we've done over 100 oral histories. And so I've learned a great deal about the community through that. Sauterly, I know that Sauterly has changed drastically from the time that I first visited with my 85-year-old African-American friend, and all for the better, all for the better. And I have tried to do my part. I think, if anything, I became more aware of the fact that the community here is still, I was surprised by the amount of resentment or lack of connection that still existed in the 2000s, basically, that the African American Committee, and same thing with St. Mary's College to a certain extent, but that, people used to call St. Mary's College the plantation, some people. And historic Sauterly was a plantation, so, but there's still a great divide, and Sauterly has done so much to try to bring people in. But I was aware that when I first visited Sauterly, that there were still people who were very much, there were still even, some docents and people who were not at all comfortable with talking about slavery, and for example. So it had a ways to go. Sauterly, so, I mean, I already had pretty high level of awareness of racism and that sort of thing in general, but I had not lived someplace like this, and actually the community is much more diverse. I mean, it's my friends and my group that I work with are more African American, for example, and I learned about the history of the county, and it was basically black and white, and then of course started becoming more diverse with the base, with the Navy base. But I'm not sure what else. Sauterly has made me more aware of the need and the difficulty of being able to represent yourself as we are a historic plantation, but we are really trying to tell an inclusive story and an important story, and we're really focused, as far as I'm concerned, on telling the story of enslaved labor in a way that not very many people are able, to do. I have a sudden visitor. So I don't know how else to answer that question.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here, but I wanted to thank you so much for joining and sharing with us today. I really appreciate it. And, when I get a task, who are you going to call? And you're on my fast dial. Thank you so much, Meredith. And I'll turn it back over to Nancy now.
Okay.
Meredith, I just don't know what to say. It almost brought me to tears a few times. In the last dozen years that I have had the unbelievable pleasure of knowing Meredith, she has brought so much. And Mick's question, your question about what she was made more aware of by working at Sauterly, is more of what Sauterly became aware of by working with Meredith. She, like Jeannie and I, both had the pleasure of knowing Agnes King Callum. We knew the impact that this woman and her stories could have. And through her project direction on our Land, Lives, and Labor exhibit, her project direction on reinterpreting the site and redoing our guided tours, really set us, and she has been with us lockstep as we have continued to work on improving the way that we can work with our community. She has been part of all 3 years of our Common Ground programming. And Merideth, you were as incredible today as you always are. You are truly an inspiration to me every day, and I just cannot believe how lucky we are to have you with us. I can't wait to broadcast this again and again, because your thoughts on this, the saying listening is an act of love, it is, and it's something we are trying so much to promote here at Southerly. Listen to a different perspective. She has helped us in our trying to reframe how Southerly told its history. And Merideth, with your help, hopefully we can continue to broadcast to a greater audience the fact that we all need to reframe our understanding of history, and maybe reframing our understanding of what we are internally, each of us. And I just cannot thank you enough for all that you have done for us, continue to do for us. To all of you who joined us, you are so fortunate that you got to be part of this today. Thank you so much. And tomorrow, if you are able to join us on Facebook or even join us in person, we will be taking part in the UNESCO Day of Remembrance. We are a UNESCO site of memory, and at 1 o'clock we will go live on Facebook as we remember and honor those in our past. You are welcome to join us on site. We'll be socially distancing and wearing masks, but it will be remembering our wonderful event last year. We will be taking part in it again this year. Do also mark your calendars for September 18th and 19th. Kenyatta Berry will be with us, a wonderful genealogist. It's going to be an incredible program. Join us every Thursday at 2 o'clock for Jeannie's Big Picture, also part of our Common Ground programming. And stay tuned, because I think there will be more Common Ground activities coming up, so make sure you stay tuned. Merideth, again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for behind the scenes. Thank you to Kat for the production, and Jeannie, as always, thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.